If you're looking for pickleball therapy, you're at the right place. A couple of housekeeping notes before we dive into the podcast. If you're listening to this podcast before December 17th, make sure to join us for our Pickleball Trends 2025 seminar we have going on December 17th. We're going to be talking about what we're seeing in the game that is going to continue in 2025 and give you tips on how to deal with those parts of the game that are continuing to evolve as pickleball continues to evolve as a sport, which is awesome because it continues to challenge us. And then the second note that I wanted to make is that we have partnered with Pickleball Central as our pickleball supplier. And if you know anything about Pickleball Central, you know that they're the leader in our sport for a reason. They have great customer service. And many of you ask us, how can I support the podcast? An easy way to support the podcast is to get your pickleball gear from Pickleball Central by using our link and our code. It's not going to cost you any more than it would cost you otherwise. And using the link and the code helps us by supporting us through our relationship and our partnership with Pickleball Central. I'll put a link in the show notes, but the easiest way to do this and to just keep this in mind is if you go to our website, betterpickleball.com. First, you can find information about the December 17th event coming up. And secondly, if you click on resources, you'll always get the most current link and code there. Without further ado, let's dive into the podcast. Hello and welcome to Pickleball Therapy, the podcast dedicated to your pickleball improvement with a focus on your pickleball mind. I'm your host of this weekly podcast, Tony Roy. It's a pleasure to be with you. As we get into the podcast, we're going to be continuing the conversation, I should say, from last week's episode, where we started dealing with this idea of setting expectations, specifically regarding errors that we're going to make when we play, missed shots, so that we can deal with them in a healthier, more positive way. This week, we're going to continue that conversation based on some follow-up that I had with a local player who I have these kind of conversations with, and he pushes me in certain ways and in a positive way, pushes me to think about it further, and also presents me with ways of thinking that I recognize as being common for players out there. And so I want to address that in this week's podcast to drive home the conversation we were having last week about setting reasonable expectations. Before we dive into the podcast, I wanted to give a shout out. Appreciate the reviews that you all leave on YouTube as well as in the podcast platforms. This one comes from Thomas and Dennis. Alongside it, positive vibrations. Always a pleasure to listen. I'll take it to my matches today. Appreciate the shout out and keep them coming. We like getting them. Just that's reality, right? That's a truth. And but it also helps other players reach it, not just because they get to see the review and make a decision for themselves, but also because the algorithm. We live in a world of algorithms, and the algorithm will feed information based on how popular something is or how much interaction there is. So the more interaction there is with a piece of content, the more it gets pushed out there. That's just how everything's built. So we appreciate you going in and taking the time to review the podcast or leave a comment. It helps us reach other players. All right, let's dive into the topic for this week. And what I encourage you to do is, if you did not listen to the podcast last week about what's a 15% volley, or if you don't really remember it or you're not really sure, highly recommend you check that one out first. I'm going to summarize it here, but this podcast will not be as meaningful to you if you don't really grasp the concepts from the prior podcast that have to do with the 15% volley. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what's the best way for us to approach the invariable situation where we miss a shot. And we've been using, the last time we used a volley, I'll keep on using that framing here. But how do we deal with how do we react to situation during a game when we miss a volley, even an easy one, into the net or out, long or wide? So we miss a shot that we, quote unquote, should otherwise not miss. How do we approach that? So in that 15% volley, we talked about that and went into that in depth. And what happened is I play locally with in a few groups, but David P is a good friend of mine here locally, and I get to play with him a few times a month. And I've known him for a long time, and we have a good relationship, and I banter with him about when he gets on himself about missing and things like that. And so I believe over the years we've had a positive. I've been able to be of help to him in terms of his personal growth as a player, and I think he's enjoying the sport more, and just like all of us, right? Just proceeding as a human being and evolving as a human being. And so we were, while I was developing this idea of the missed shot and how to deal with it, the 15% idea. And so I shared that with him during one of our recent sessions together. And he responded by, actually he took it home, thought about it. He likes thinking about things, including pickleball. And so he took it home with him. And then next time I saw him, he said, I've been thinking about the 15%. And, basically it threw me basically what appears to be a curveball. Okay. At first it appears to be a curveball, and it is a fair, it's fair to hear this, and I'll explain in a second, but it's fair to hear this and say, okay, that makes sense, right? I can do that. But when you really start breaking it down, it doesn't work. The curveball doesn't work, and you're back to the 15% being a good way of approaching the game. So the curveball is this, and we're using 15, same as last time. So 15 out of 100 volleys are going to be missed, 85 will be successful. So 15 is our average error rate. And the curveball is, I can do better than my average, right? Meaning that in this game right now, I can do better than 15 errors per game. And then the idea here is you basically talk yourself into this concept that if I just focus better, or if I just, execute better, if I move better, whatever it is, right? I can overcome my expected average, my expected miss ratio, the 15 that we've been using. In other words, I can do better than that. And the reality, though, is that the 15, by its very nature, is something that cannot be fixed by you in the current moment. And you'll understand that as we work through this. But it's something that you cannot fix by definition, because the 15 is baked into yourself as a player. It's baked into your humanity. There's several items, or I'm calling them items right now, but obstacles, if you will, that will arise during a game that will impact your results negatively. Things like losing focus. Think about just misjudging the flight of a ball as it traveled towards you before you hit it, right? So the ball's traveling your way. There's a little bit of wind, or maybe you misread the angle of the shot with the way it's traveling, the amount of energy it has, how fast it's coming to you, all those sorts of things. And if you really step back for a second, let's step back for a second from this. Think of how amazing it is that you are able to figure out the expected point in the universe where a ball is going to be sometime in the future, and get your paddle around to hit that ball at around the time that the ball is there. I mean, that's just kind of crazy, right? That I can actually do that. But within that, there's baked in some error, right? Some margin for error that you're going to commit because you're going to just misjudge the ball. You're going to swing the paddle in the wrong trajectory. You're going to swing the paddle a little too late. You're going to maybe stumble a little bit as you're moving. All those sorts of things. All those obstacles that are that are inherent in your nature as a fallible human being who is subject to variability in how you do things as you go through your day and as you go through a pickleball game. And so these obstacles, or these items that will naturally arise as part of you being a human being, are what create the 15%. These are the obstacles. These are the reasons why you cannot reasonably say, the next game I play, I will not miss a single shot. Imagine that. Imagine saying to yourself, the next game I play, I am not going to miss a single shot. I mean, it sounds crazy when you hear it, right? That doesn't make any sense. That's not possible. And that's because you're a human being. And you have, again, items or obstacles that will arise naturally. And those are the items that, by extension, create that 15%. And those items are, again, unavoidable. So if the items are unavoidable and the items create the 15%, or whatever the number is, right? Remember from last time, might be 20%, it might be 10%. If the items or the obstacles are unavoidable and they generate the percentage, then that means that the percentage is unavoidable by extension. Okay, and I'm going to talk about a couple more topics here to complete the picture here. But the idea that I can best my average is a fallacy. And what happens is, if I use that thinking, then I have not avoid, but I sidestep, or I don't get the benefit of the thought processes that we went over in the last episode. The benefits of, when I miss a shot, just being able to say, okay, I mean, I'm not excited about it, but I realize that mistake that I made is simply part and parcel of the overall picture of me as a pickleball player, no matter how good I get. And so it's okay for me to have missed that shot. So we sidestep that benefit by saying to ourselves, no, not this game though, right? Not this game. This game, I shouldn't have missed it, because this game I'm going to do better than my expected number, which again, if it's expected, then you can't get away from it, right? Because you're expecting it. So, and you can set the number however you want. And I'm going to talk about that more in a second, because you can reduce the number. You can get it down from whatever your number is now to a different number. But at the end of the day, recognize that you're always going to have a number. And how you decide to react to the missed volley relative to that number is going to be relevant to how you feel, and also just dealing in the real world. So there's a couple more points that I want to get to in a second. But before I do, I've mentioned this last time, and I'm going to tell you about it again, because we're in the season still. We have some really easy ways to enter into the Better Pickleball Academy right now. The CJ and the folks at the Better Pickleball coaching team have put together some really nice packages on the Better Pickleball Academy. So if you want to check out what we have in the Better Pickleball Academy, get yourself out of the YouTube algorithm sending you the videos that may or may not help you. And I will tell you, the percentage-wise, the very low percentage that a video that you get on YouTube is actually going to help you. But if you're tired of that stuff, you want to check out the Academy, now is a great time. Just go to betterpickleball.com and check out what's going on, what they got for you there. One more thing before I get into these notes. It was kind of a funny timing. So this morning, before I recorded this podcast, I was making some eggs. So I was whipping some eggs to scramble them. And I went to grab, I put salt in them, and then I went to grab the pepper. And when I reached up to grab the peppers, I came back down, I knocked the glass over, like for real. Knocked the glass over, busted, the eggs spilled all over the place. And that very apropos, given the subject of last week's podcast and this week's podcast, which is human error. Now, was I happy that I broke the glass? Of course not. But I had the benefit of, I had already been thinking about the content of this podcast, and I had written out the article that goes along with this podcast. And it's interesting that, after I wrote that, I go in there and I knock this glass over, eggs spill out, they go between the cabinet and the oven, they slide. I mean, it's just it's a mess. But it's just part and parcel of being a human being. Like, human beings make those kinds of mistakes. I brought my arm down and didn't, see the glass out of the corner of my eye. I wear glasses too, so I didn't see it out of the periphery, and I knocked it and it fell over. Life, right? It's no different than playing pickleball. And that's one of the beauties of and you've heard me say this before probably, but that's one of the beauties of our sport, is if you use it as a canvas for yourself, for your personal growth, for your development as a human being, you can grow in ways that, are not on the pickleball court, that help you just enjoy a better life, so that next time you knock over a glass and spill eggs all over the place, you just go, well, that's just my 15% or 10% or whatever percentage you like for yourself. So anyway, I thought that was the timing of it could not have been better. All right, two more notes that I want to talk about on this subject to wrap it up for you. One is, we've been talking 15%, right? And that's just a placeholder for our conversation, so that, like a shorthand for us to have this conversation. As I mentioned last time, your number, the number for many of us is likely higher than, likely higher than 15%. Just because that's just human nature. Again, no big deal. It's just a number, right? But it's higher, right? For many of us. So, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. You can reduce the number over the long term. In other words, you can work on your game. There are techniques to to increase your focus when you play. You're never going to get the 100% focus, not a thing, but you can definitely increase your focus. You can decrease your distraction, which by extension increases your focus, right? So if I'm less distracted when I play, I'm more focused because I'm not using my mental bandwidth on distracting thoughts like what's the score in the middle of a rally when it doesn't matter while I'm in the rally, or getting upset about a line call and then having that bleed over, or even you miss a volley, right? You're not using the technique that we've talked about last week and this week in terms of accepting it as just being part and parcel of your game. So now you're just you're hyper focused on you're obsessing about the missed volley and oh my God, I can't believe I missed a volley, and now you miss the next two shots because of it. It happens all the time. So you can improve your focus when you play with these techniques and with, working on your mental game. You can improve your shots for sure by working on your shots, by practicing, by drilling, by even by playing some, but more by practicing, by drilling. You can improve your shots. If you understand what goes into your shots, like shot variability and removing variables, there's all sorts of ways to reduce your percentage. That said, at the end of the day, you will have a percentage that is higher than 0%. There is no 0% error rate. Not even the pros have a 0% error rate. So that is impossible. And this leads to the second point, which is that you can work it down, but no matter what, you're going to have a number. So even if you were able to squeeze your rate down to whatever number you want, and I'm going to use 12% here because that's the number my friend David P. gave to me. He keeps on saying, I'm going to get it to 12 today. But even if you go from 15 to 12, doesn't change what we talked about last time, because you're still going to miss a volley, right? I mean, we all agreed to that last time, that you're going to miss shots. So when you miss that volley, now, okay, it's not a 15% volley anymore. It's a what? It's just a 12% volley. But the reaction to it, how you interpret what happened, is identical, whether it's a 15% volley, a 12% volley, or even a 2% volley. When you miss the shot, it is within the expected ratio of your expected error rate, no matter what that rate is. So it becomes, basically you come back to the same analysis here. And so, the idea that I'm going to play better than my average fails, because whatever you end up doing is going to be essentially your average for that game, right? It's going to be your rate for that game. So when you miss the shot, you still come back to, that's simply one of the shots that goes into the category of my normal error rate as a human being. And when you do that, you don't get as upset about missing the shot. You don't potentially spiral and obsess about the missed shot. You accept it as just being part and parcel of the big picture, which gives you a healthier perspective and grounds you in reality. Because that's another thing that's, I think, really important when you think about how you approach the mental part of the game, is not allowing yourself to get lost in some hypothetical fantasy world of, in this case, never missing a volley when you play pickleball. So again, if you did not have a chance to listen to the last podcast, check that one out. Listen to this one again. This concept of 15% or 20% or 12% error rate will really, really help you in your play, because missing shots is going to happen every single time that you get out on the pickleball court. Obsessing about missed shots is a common distraction. I see it all the time. In fact, I've called timeouts in tournaments when I've seen my partner get distracted over a missed shot, because I know what's going to happen. I've seen it in tournament play when we do game studies, in pro matches, where you'll see they'll miss a shot and they'll miss the next two shots, or one or two shots, maybe three, because it's a carryover effect that happens. So the better you're able to disassociate the next rally from the error that you just made, which you're going to make, by using techniques like this one. And this is a very powerful one, because it's grounded in reality. It's not just tricking yourself into moving on. Here you're moving on because you're like, I'm a human being. It's perfectly fine, just like me spilling the eggs earlier. So you're able to then move on from rally to rally much, much easier when you make the silly mistakes, which again, unfortunately, or fortunately, I would say, you will make as a human being. So I highly recommend checking out this podcast and the prior podcast again in the future. Bookmark them, put it on your calendar, because these concepts, if they sink in deep inside you, you're going to feel way better the next time that you spill eggs on your counter. I got to go clean them now. I got to go clean up the cabinet between the oven and the cabinet. But next time you spill those eggs, you're not going to be as upset about it, because it's just part of the deal. All right, I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a minute to rate, review, or comment on the podcast, really appreciate that. And as always, please consider sharing this podcast with your friends who play pickleball, particularly because if you enjoy the podcast, they probably will too. Have a great week, and we'll see you on the next episode of Pickleball Therapy. Be well.